So a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. I'd like to invite everybody to tweet at our experts or follow along as our lovely and talented social media manager, Derek Cohen, live tweets our webinar using the hashtag SEO Best Practices. What we're going to cover today, we're going to start by talking about building a solid SEO foundation with your website. Then we'll move on to what it takes to create a strong keyword strategy, why you should establish an SEO style guide, and then we'll move into what you can do to optimize your content with mobile, voice, and global trends in mind. And then finally, what you should do in order to learn from results and keep the virtuous cycle going. We're going to do a Q&A at the end of the presentation. There is a space in the lower left-hand side of your screen where you can feel free to type in questions as they occur to you throughout the webinar, and then we will answer as many of those as we have time for during the Q&A session at the end. So with that said, let's dive on in. I'm going to hand things over to Matias.
Thanks, Rachel. In order to set your site and content up for SEO success, allow me to introduce a simple metaphor. First, imagine your website is a house, and second, content marketing is the furnishings and decor that fill the house. All of the furniture and decor work together to form a style and personality that represents your brand, with the goal being that anyone entering your home understands who you are, feels intrigued, and wants to stick around. But there's another crucial element in creating this welcoming and inviting environment. With content marketing as the furnishings of your house's foundation and framework are your website's coding, configuration, and hosting environment. And a poorly optimized site is like keeping expensive furniture in a home with leaking pipes and cracked floors. It's critical that your site is technically sound so that your content is easily indexed, ranked, and so your visitors have the best experience possible. And that's what we're here to help you talk through today. Starting off with your house's blueprint, or sitemap, is critical. Sitemaps list out every single URL on your site. They include information about each page, like how important you consider the page to be within your site, and how frequently you update and maintain your pages. Your sitemap houses important information that search engines trace through to crawl and index your site. Which brings us to the three pillars of SEO: crawlability, content, and credibility. Crawlability is determined by back-end considerations like your sitemap, page organization, and server configuration. When your site is able to easily be crawled by search engines, those search engines can then deem whether or not your site is relevant to users when they search, ultimately allowing them to more easily rank. Here's some quick tips. Leverage Google Search Console to get data, tools, and diagnostics needed to create and maintain Google-friendly websites and mobile apps. You can also leverage a site colon function in Google to see how many pages of your site are indexed and recognized by Google. This brings us to content. Content is what shapes your page and is indexed by search engines. If search engines don't consider your content useful or engaging after they crawl your site, then they won't favor the content in search, listing your pages in prominent search engine ranking positions. And lastly, credibility, which plays a major role in how your site is favored in search. It's not too different than a high school popularity contest. Each vote for your prom king and queen is an endorsement. The difference introduced over the years is that, unlike high school, each vote is weighted based on popularity of the individual doing the voting, or in this case, the value of a backlink to your page is only as good as the other sites that backlink to their pages. It's about authority. For example, being backlinked to by the New York Times or another established publication earns your site major credibility. Subject matter expert contributors also help establish credibility, which is why it's important to create robust, optimized bio pages for your contributors. Crawlability, content, and credibility all speak to why it's important to have a strong linking strategy on your site. Navigational links help flow users through your site, while outbound and inbound links help give your content credibility. To maintain healthy navigational links, make sure you're using the sitemap to diagnose any flow issues. Best practices around outbound links or links to other domains with supporting material are to link to authoritative pages and not to overload your page with sources. After all, you're trying to establish yourself as a resource too. Inbound links are the ultimate desire of content marketers. They're those New York Times backlinks I just mentioned. This is accomplished through creating excellent content that is reliable and shareable. A good place to start with authoritative inbound links is to have your brand's other web properties linked to your content, especially if your content is off domain.
So that surfaces a really crucial consideration when you are launching any kind of content marketing initiative that has really major search implications. So we want to pull our audience around this concept because it's a really important point of discussion. Do you host your content on domain or off domain? So it looks like we have a massive majority who are on domain, which is really interesting. I think that we've seen something of a shift back towards having more of a brand presence on a content site. There was kind of a trend, I would say, a couple years ago that had to do more with keeping your brand presence and your content site relatively separate. And this shows that we're moving back, the pendulum swinging back.
All right. So since most of us are on domain, we're going to move into a conversation about how to decide whether that's a place you want to stay or if there's a new way that your brand wants to be evolving. The on-domain and off-domain debate is a pretty common question, particularly for brands with on-domain sites. These largely have evolved out of on-page blogs and may have kind of grown into the content marketing role that your brand needs. So today, these content hubs need to fulfill a number of factors. You'll be looking at things like your current marketing goals, your brand's position in the digital space, and the infrastructure that your team currently has in place to support a site. All of these things will be considerations that you'll want to keep in mind as you're deciding between an on-domain or off-domain presence. So as we look between the two options, we're going to start with on-domain, largely since most of you are in that space. And we'll see that between these two types of content hub, there's really one balance that you're keeping in mind, and that's the balance between support or technical ease and the flexibility of your editorial department. So on an on-domain page, we have an enormous amount of technical support. You'll begin with search authority that's brought in by the domain of your hosting brand. You'll probably have a much easier time integrating with lead generation or CMS systems that your brand is already working with. And that will also expand into any other web tracking or analytical systems that you're using. For your user, this also means that they're really in a one-stop shop. They enter your page either through your content hub or through another landing page, and then they're able to navigate through your site and interact with your content in a natural way. However, there are some cons to this. If you're working within an established site, your team is going to have to likely operate within governance like existing development teams or corporate policies that might slow down your processes. You'll have to restrict your style and your editorial bent towards the overall voice and style of your existing domain, which can limit your ability to experiment or expand your audience. And lastly, as content marketers who are trying to build out authentic content experiences, you might run into some difficulty having your content hosted so closely to your other product-oriented pages. So that brings us naturally to the off-domain option, where we kind of see a flip. You may have fewer accesses to technical resources, but you're going to have a lot more bandwidth and leeway for editorial exploration. So you'll see in the pros column that we have the ability to define a distinct style and editorial voice. You'll be moving your content a step away from product, which makes it much easier to keep your conversations authentic. You'll be able to build an SEO strategy specific to that content hub and the material that you're producing, separate from the needs of your home domain. And there are fewer layers of governance typically to navigate when you're trying to make changes to the site or changes in direction for your editorial strategy. However, this also means you're going to have to start without as much search authority as you would. In fact, if you're starting a new off-domain page, you will start with none. And this means you're going to have a long uphill battle, but with compounding returns that you can easily demonstrate to your brand, to your companies. Likewise, integrating with your established lead generation or CMS system can get difficult. Different systems are better at handling cross-domain tracking than others, and that's going to require some uplift from both your team and the rest of your company. And lastly, once it comes to the higher level tracking like web analytics, you're also going to run into the same sort of issues where you're trying to track and understand behavior that is moving between multiple sites. So with these two kind of foundations in mind, we can look at the next level of foundation for your Content Hub, which is going to be your keyword strategy.
And I'll take it from there. So now that your foundation is stable, it's time to talk about the pages you'll consistently be building upon that foundation with, which need to be just as stable. And a key component of that stability is your keyword strategy. Keyword strategy should always have your target audience in mind. So you should be asking yourself, what topics and questions define your audience? What will they be searching for, and how can you answer those searches best? Once you've identified your audience's needs, you should define your keyword categories. These make up the top level of the umbrella diagram that you see here to the right. They're usually short-tail keywords that broadly get at what you're hoping to accomplish with your website. They'll tend to be high-volume terms with moderate to high competition depending on your industry. These broad terms, though, are typically hard to rank on, which is why it's crucial to then expand upon these categories, so underneath these umbrellas, with longer-tail keywords that are more specific and realistic for your content to rank on. These long-tail specific keywords will ultimately help support those targeted short-tail and broader keywords. With a keyword strategy locked down, establishing an SEO style guide that governs the metadata creation is a crucial complement to that. It makes sure all of the small but important technical elements of your home are consistently in place.
Exactly. It's a really important part of making sure that all of your content rolls up to your larger SEO strategy. So what we want to know is how many of the people on the call today have a style guide. All right, so we're seeing that a small but not ridiculously small minority do, but most of the people on the call don't. I find that interesting.
Yeah, and that's why we're here today, I guess, because you should all be sure to have an approach to your SEO style guide. It should include an approach to all title tags, meta descriptions, robot attributes, alt text, and file names. Some best practices to get you started around these areas are listed here, and there's definitely a constant across all of them, and that's to not keyword stuff. So keyword stuffing as a term, it was a tactic of old that involved including as many keywords as possible in metadata, but as we talked about today, Google has since adjusted its algorithms against this. So with that said, rules of thumb around title tags, aside from not keyword stuffing, are to keep them under 60 characters and to use a parent-child structure similar to the way that we looked at our keyword strategy overall, so starting broad and then looking to refine. Your metadata should hit between 160 and 250 characters. And that brings us to robot attributes, which you might be asking, what are those? And so to define them, it's when search engines crawl your site, your robot.txt files and your robot attribute tags tell the search engines what it should and should not search. So if you assign a no index or a no follow, your content won't be picked up by search engines. You might be wondering, why would I want my content to not be picked up? And some instances that would warrant that are if, for example, you have a temporary page that you might want to put a no index tag on, or you have a forum that might warrant a no follow. And so a forum makes sense because if you have an SEO strategy behind the content you're creating, you have less control over the comments that are generated from the forum, so it would make sense to want to have that. But that's obviously site-specific, so for that reason, your style guide should really be developed to attribute for these and define a rule around this for your site. Alt text and file names are data that should concisely describe all images and files. It's really important to optimize your images as well as your content, and those are often forgot about. So this means making sure that you're not uploading files that are titled screenshot 050413. Google is not going to know what you mean by that. And so that means that we want to make sure we're correctly titling brand logos, CTA buttons, anything that's an image file so that Google is sure to pick those up as well.
We've said it over and over again, SEO moves fast. And there are more and more implications for SEO as technology moves at an even faster speed. Mobile users, voice assistant users, and global users all need to be considered as more than likely guests in your home. How do you prepare for all of that? Google algorithm updates are an effort to provide a user experience rooted in high quality, useful, engaging content. which means there is one thing we can rest assured about. Story remains favored and constant across all of these trends. With smarter technology and algorithms, gone are the days of keyword stuffing and technical exploits to beat the system. High-quality, engaging stories are positioned to win in the new world of SEO, which means using story as structure behind your content is important. Define a protagonist, identify an object of desire, tackle forces of antagonism, and be authentic when approaching content. But another consideration to be made with mobile in particular is being responsive. If your site or content is not optimized for mobile, then you aren't going to be reaching a large amount of your audience where they expect to find you. You also risk harming your visitors' experience, which will lead to decline in your reach and effectiveness. And to be frank, not optimizing for mobile will ultimately lead to failure. For voice search, create content that answers daily conversational questions. While it's very much in its infancy, this is a solid place to start knowing how voice assistant users interact with their devices. For global users, it's important to meet them locally. That means transcreating, not just translating, content so that nuances and meanings aren't misrepresented locally. It also means optimizing for the right search engines. For example, while Google is a household name in the US, Baidu is a search engine of choice in China. It's important to research what that means for your SEO strategy. And lastly, make sure you're paying attention to how global content creation and hosting affects your site's health. Is it slowing down your site speed? Knowing how Google values crawlability and user experience, this is an important element to regularly check.
So sadly, SEO is not a process that we can just do once and then leave it on our site and be content with it. A lively SEO strategy will involve an additional system at the end, both for tracking and reporting on metrics, and then turning those into audits that actually improve your site. So some metric reports to think about as you're constructing your SEO strategy are keyword ranking reports, organic traffic tracking, and referral tracking. Keyword ranking reports are probably what you most immediately think about when you think about an SEO report. These are reports that list out all of the short and long-tailed keywords that you are targeting and lists your relative search ranking strength against those keywords. Organic traffic tracking is kind of part and parcel of that. These are reports that tell you how traffic is coming into your site from search, what keywords are performing well for you, and how people are reacting to your content after they've actually landed on your page. And then lastly is referral tracking. This is one of the gold standards of SEO. If we're trying to improve our site authority and the way that Google or other search engines value our sites, we need to be building a large repertoire of healthy backlinks. And that's what referral tracking can help you look into. So once you have these metric reports in place, it naturally pushes you into an audit. You have information that you can use to actually improve your site. So the first audit that we can think about is technical. This is kind of separate from your content. You're basically just looking at, is my site built correctly? Is there anything with my organization, with the structure of my pages, with the way that my technical backend has been set up that is going to be slowing down my pages or making the experience unhealthy for visitors and thus harming your ranking in Google? The second stage after that is your keyword audit. So based off of the information that you're getting from your organic traffic tracking and your keyword metric report, you want to examine what keywords are performing best for you and maybe which ones need to be cut from your mix. And then lastly, you have a content audit. Content audits are how you take the information from all of your reports and these last two audits and then turn it into actionable behavior for your content. You'll be looking at you'll be trying to plan out what future content you want to be producing to hit on your most effective keywords. And you'll also be looking at past content and trying to find ways to refresh them to best meet the behaviors that you're seeing in the modern day. You'll also note on our metrics reporting slide that pretty much all of these reports can be found within the Skyword platform. But for those of you who aren't on the platform today, you can find much of this information by either looking at your web tracking analytics or by going into the Google Search Console and searching site, and then your web domain.
So reporting, auditing, and readjusting your strategy really brings us full circle. And so with that, we'd like to open up the webinar for some Q&A. We've got a couple of questions that have been submitted throughout the webinar, but please do feel free to put any new questions that have come to mind in the search box on the lower left-hand side, and we will take probably around 10 to 15 minutes to run through them. So the first question actually comes from what you were just talking about, Kyle, which is about the audits that you should be conducting. How often should you be doing that?
That's a really excellent question, so thank you for that. The best answer to the question about frequency with auditing is whatever matches your production cycles. So audits are only effective if we actually take the insights that we have and then implement them, and it's hard to get audits actually conducted if they're out of line with what your business is actually doing. So for instance, with something like a technical audit, if you have a development team that operates using an Agile or a Scrum method, you'll want to be working with them to figure out when an audit best comes in that cycle for them so that they can actually implement the changes that you suggest. For something like a content audit, you'll want to look at your own production schedule and say, we're accepting pitches or we're producing new content on a monthly basis. Then you should probably be evaluating your keywords and your content on a monthly basis. At the very minimum, I would definitely suggest doing cursory reporting and looking at these on about a monthly basis, and then maybe doing a deep dive at least once or twice a year. Quarterly is sometimes aggressive for brands to keep up with, but it definitely helps keep your site in the most up-to-date and healthy space.
Great. Thank you. So here's another question. It's about the terms semantically similar and semantic keyword research, which has come up in relation to SEO. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, sure. I'll take that one because a semantically similar approach fits really well within our umbrella concept that we talked about, with the idea being that you should be using related topics and connected keywords to build out your categories or concepts and make them as robust and inclusive of searcher intent as possible. So this approach is really important because a piece of content without words related to the main topic or keyword will be off-putting to Google. And this is something that should come really naturally when you're writing a quality piece of content that's well researched. You should account for this, but it certainly doesn't hurt to start out of the gate with some preemptive research. So an example here is, how can an authoritative, trustworthy article talk about jaw pain, for example, but not mention the most common cause of jaw pain, TMJ? So again, this will be a pretty natural part of your research, but it doesn't hurt to start preempting some of that. And there are tools that can help you conduct semantically similar keyword research for that purpose. And a good place to start is on Google itself. So if you were to Google jaw pain, you would see the People Also Ask light box up at the top. But you'll also see searches related to jaw pain on the bottom of the page, which can really help guide your research.
Great. So another question just came in. So a few slides back, it mentioned having parent-child objects for title tags. Steph, I think that was in your section. Can you clarify what that means?
Yeah, sure. So it just means that if you're in the title tag, you would want to kind of hark back to your top-level umbrella category. And then as you move into the metadata creation, so the metadata description, that's where you would target some of the shorter tail keywords. Mm-hmm. So another question, how does user intent play into a keyword strategy? I guess first we should define what user intent is. Yeah, so user intent is really just thinking like a user, which we all are, and I think that's one of the things that's easy to look over when you're trying to optimize for search is that Google's actually moving in this direction, is to be more human. So I think one of our biggest resources is just to turn to our own human selves. So when you're writing, think of your user first, and that means what would you Google if you were researching on this topic? And then start to cater your topics and your content around that intent.
Great. How are we doing on time? All right. So I have one more question. So my company's content hub is off domain. That's a question we've got right here. If I wanted to bring it on domain, what should I consider?
That's a great question, Rachel, and one that we run into fairly frequently. It is a hot topic, and it tends to go one way or the other, but as we saw from the poll, most customers are now bringing their content on domain. And the things that you should consider are how much credibility has been established to the site, how well does the site rank, how much traffic do you currently receive, do you get a lot of repeat visitors. There you'll just redirect properly, but you'll potentially risk losing, so you have to really think about how you want to direct your traffic. Is your domain going to remain unbiased if you have a unique point of view, or do you have a set voice in how you're going to talk to your customer? Are you going to forego or gain any new functionality as you decide whether to keep your content on domain or off domain? And in my opinion, most importantly, where you might have historically secured strong backlinks from highly credible sources, will they still be likely to link to you if your content is off domain, off of your corporate main site?
Great. All right, so we've got just one more question and then we'll wrap it up. And the question is, how important is creating content for specific long-tail keyword phrases now that RankBrain is interpreting user searches? So wouldn't optimizing for more general terms be more successful long-term?
Yeah, that's a great question. So optimizing for the long-tail keyword phrases is important because it gets you in the game. As we talked about with the umbrella structure, your broad keywords are going to be highly competitive with a ton of volume. So especially if you're an off-domain blog, and as Kyle mentioned, you're starting off with kind of no authority, you have to get Google to recognize you. So it might mean going after some of the terms that aren't as highly searched and they're a bit more unwieldy in how long their structure is. But it's important to start creating content around it so that you can create that base to then, again, target those broader short-tail keywords for the long term.
Awesome. So before we wrap things up, I would be remiss if I didn't mention two really awesome events that are coming up very soon, Forward and Storynomics. At Forward, we are looking forward to hosting hundreds of brand storytellers June 14th. Here in Boston, we'll be doing a bit of a deep dive into content marketing best practices and really celebrating what's happening in brand storytelling today. And then the day after Forward, on June 15th, we'll be hosting Storynomics with Robert McKee and Tom Gerace. They'll be talking about what story is and how that translates to business strategy and can lead to economic and leadership success. So, that plug having been successfully fulfilled, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. So we will be sending out an email with a recording and slides. You can also access our SEO Best Practice Playbook at the landing page that you see right here. Don't worry, you don't have to write it down. Like I said, you're going to get these slides. If you have any questions about what we discussed today, or if you want to learn more about what Skyword does or our upcoming events, you can tweet at our experts, or you can email us at learnmore@skyword.com. So from the team here, once more, thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye, everybody.